Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squad for boxing news and views from around the internet. 2019 really has been a lost year for Joseph Parker. What looked to be a solid rebuild year on the horizon really hasn't panned out that way. He was looking to have 3 fights in 2019, but approaching November 2019, he'd had the one journeyman level fight against Alex Leapai and nothing else on the ledger. So where did it all go wrong? What's happening and where to next for Joseph Parker? So I guess we'll start at the beginning. I mean, there was a lot of optimism entering the year after a tune-up victory over Alexander Flores that he was on to bigger and better fights in 2019, following what was a down year in 2018 where he dropped his WBO title to Anthony Joshua and then followed that up with another loss against Dillian Whyte in July 2018. Talk bubbled up that there would be a fight with Derek Chisora in April 2019, and it looked like it was going to get over the line, but there was seemingly some hijinks on the Chisora and David Haye end. They looked like they were trying to crib a little bit of extra time and run down Joseph Parker's training camp time, and David Higgins, Joseph Parker's promoter at that point, said, no, if you don't give us the contract by a certain date, we're not taking the fight. We can't have less than 7 weeks for a training camp, not for a fight of this importance given the losses back in 2018. So they played chicken with Chisora and Haye and Eddie Hearn, who was organising that fight card. Ultimately, the deal did not get done. The deadline was passed, and David Higgins and Joseph Parker opted not to take the fight. So many fans were bitterly disappointed with that decision because seemingly it looked like it was going to happen, and there was one school of thought at the time saying, well, Joseph Parker, knowing it is going to happen, the fight card's on, Derek Chisora is going to be on the bill, it looks like you're going to be the guy fighting him. Why couldn't you started a training camp? But Higgins opted not to roll the dice and not to take that risk. Many people saw that as a very good sort of build back up fight for Joseph Parker, with the style matchup in many people's minds favouring the New Zealander, and it would have been a fight that would lead to bigger and better things. Obviously, he'd have to win it, and we don't know what would happen in that fight because a second opportunity later in the year, which would have been on October the 26th, fell over after Joseph Parker pulled out. The fight did get made. It was going to happen. He was in training camp, but seemingly bitten by a spider. Well, so the story goes. Couldn't train for the best part of 3 weeks, so they ended up pulling the pin, saying that he wasn't going to be fit to fight. It wasn't the ideal preparation for a fight of this magnitude at this point in Parker's career. And not everyone has been totally sympathetic, given that Parker has been spotted in a nightclub partying with Tyson Fury and Floyd Mayweather since, and maybe that's a little bit of bad timing on Parker's behalf, so soon after pulling out and saying he wasn't up to it. But in my view, if you miss that much of a training camp, that isn't ideal preparation, and I think any fighter is within their rights to do what Parker has done if 3 weeks of their camp has been scuppered because of illness. But ultimately, that leaves fans disappointed. We wanted to see that fight. Who would have won? Well, we may never know. But what we have seen this year from Joseph Parker is just one tune-up fight. Post him signing with Matchroom after his contract with Duco Events ran out, Parker signed on to Matchroom with his old promoter David Higgins acting for him in an advisory and management capacity moving forward. He sticks with his trainer Kevin Barry. They look to be having a fight with Eric Molina at the end of June. Molina pulls out. They wheel out a faded and tired Alex Leapai on a few days' notice, and he takes Joseph Parker 10 rounds. It wasn't the sort of performance that Parker was expecting, that Parker was talking about, and that fans were expecting either. And ultimately, Parker sort of failed to impress, even though he didn't really have any trouble in that fight and didn't really lose a second of any round. But ultimately, Leapai, who'd been basically on the couch for a few years, very inactive, he took Parker 10 rounds, and I think that surprised many. So in sum total for 2019, it looks like that might be his lot for the year. His promoter, Eddie Hearn, has said, look, I don't know if I have the cards and the space to get Joseph Parker onto something in 2019. It might have to be 2020. And when you consider that Joseph Parker has had a renewed attitude to training and a renewed attitude to staying in shape and eating well in between fights. And he's been maintaining his weight, and visibly through, the year when we've seen him, he hasn't blown up as he normally had, sort of earlier in his career, where between fights he would go up, 20 to 30 pounds. He had to lose about 30 pounds before the fight with Anthony Joshua. And he spoke about that at length, saying, look, he didn't like that, didn't feel good having to go into camp to lose so much weight, and it took away from other things that he could have been focusing on for his fight preparations. So in a sense, with everything that's happened, the 2 failed fights with Chisora and the 1 journeyman level fight, it almost feels like it's a waste of what's been happening at the only time in Parker's career where he's really been dialed in on the discipline front. So hopefully, given some of these setbacks, and even if he can't have a fight in 2019, hopefully he stays disciplined, because 2020 could be a big year for him. We may not see a fight against Derek Chisora. Derek Chisora has been a little bit lukewarm on that, and I guess understandably so, because talk of him fighting Joseph Parker 2 times in 2019, it almost came to pass in April, but it never happened. It almost came to pass in October, but it never happened, and it was only 2.5 weeks away from happening when Joseph Parker pulled out with the suspected spider bite. So, what next for Joseph Parker? Well, seemingly, he's in a very good position with the WBO right now. He is number 4 rated, and that could actually be very beneficial in 2020 if the WBO belt is vacated at any point, because there is the chance of that happening. With the IBF having ordered its mandatory Kubrat Pulev to have its title shot by the end of May, there could be a situation where the winner of Andy Ruiz Jr. and Anthony Joshua, that rematch on December 7th, is forced to drop a belt, either the IBF or the WBO, because mandatories have been piling up for some time, and the WBO was originally ahead of the IBF in the sort of order that it was going in, and that was confirmed earlier this year in June by an IBF representative. But seemingly things have changed now, with the IBF saying, well, our guy, he needs to have his shot by the end of May 2019. So there could be some scope for Joseph Parker to fight for a vacant title, and if that comes up, that would be against Alexander Usyk. So we won't necessarily get into that too much, because there's lots of ifs, buts and maybes, and we can leave the sort of that fight for another day, but that could be a possible option. The Chisora option, well, Joseph Parker has said he still wants that fight. His promoter has stated publicly after the second time that it's been sort of cancelled that he would still like to have that Chisora fight. And for Parker on the way up, if he can get past Chisora and look good in doing so, obviously that is a good level of competition to sort of be stepping into after, this time out of the ring. But if he steps straight into a fight with Alexander Usyk and there's no fight in between, well, that's maybe not ideal preparation. But I predict his promoter, Eddie Hearn, is probably going to just wait, see what happens with this rematch on December 7th, and then sort of take things from there, because if it doesn't fall his way, there's no vacated title, or there's a deal made that the WBO can be fought for later in 2020 for whoever the champion is at that point, well, then maybe Joseph Parker and a Derek Chisora could get resurrected, or at least Joseph Parker steps into some sort of tune-up just for some activity, because the one fight in 2019 is not ideal, and if he can get out early in 2020 just for a warm-up and then into something bigger, well, he can take things from there. But it really has been disappointing as a fan of Joseph Parker to see that, this inactivity in 2019. Some of it, you could argue, with that first fight with Chisora was maybe on them to some extent, because they obviously put the ultimatum down and they pulled the trigger on that. But seemingly later in the year, it was sort of out of anyone's control, illness scuppering the fight. But where to next for Joseph Parker, do you believe? Let me know. The 27-year-old, arguably you could say he's just lost a year of his prime. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.